Well, happy Super Bowl Sunday to all of you. Those of you who know me know I have absolutely no interest in sports. I am much more interested in the last Sunday of this month, which is Academy Awards Sunday, which, as many of you know, is the gay Super Bowl. Now, one of the movies that is nominated for 2 Academy Awards this year is the movie Steve Jobs, which of course is about the visionary founder of Apple Computers, a man who saw the possible where most people saw the impossible. And one of the interesting things that I learned about Steve Jobs is that he only had one book downloaded on his iPad. You know, that device can hold hundreds of books. He only had one. It was a book that he first read when he was 17, and then he read again every year throughout for the rest of his life. This was a book that he instructed be given to everyone who came to his funeral. And so everyone in attendance that day received a beautiful gift box, and in it was a copy of this book. Now, what is this book that this visionary man read year after year? The only book that he had on his iPad. Well, it's a book that was written in 1946, and it's called Autobiography of a Yogi. And it was written by Paramahansa Yogananda, a Hindu Swami who came to the US from India in 1920 and who founded the Self-Realization Fellowship. Yogananda really struck a chord with Westerners because he was able to parallel Hindu teachings with the teachings of Jesus. When I first read Autobiography of a Yogi several years ago, it was the first time that I heard the term samadhi. Samadhi is the highest level of meditation. It is when a person becomes united with God, which is what the word yoga means. It means union with God. It's where the person in meditation experiences oneness with divine. And in a short period of time, the person in meditation, the person in the state of samadhi, loses human consciousness and is totally at one with the divine consciousness. Now, it is not only in Hindu circles that we hear about samadhi. In Buddhism, many of you know the story of the Buddha, that it was sitting under the Bodhi tree in this state of meditation that he experienced this state, which is referred to as enlightenment, into being full of light. Now, when someone is in this state of samadhi, it can be very frightening for the people around them to observe. Today's readings from the Old Testament and from the New Testament are about this state. Moses and Jesus both experienced this samadhi, this enlightenment. And if you notice, it frightened the people who saw it, because their face became transfigured, translucent. They were just full of light. So what does this mean for us today? Well, both of these stories happened on a mountaintop. And I've told you before, the mountain symbolizes a place of higher consciousness. We must leave the rest of the world and go up to the mountain, to this higher place, so that we can make this connection. Jesus goes up and he brings 3 of his close apostles with him. And when he's up there in that state of meditation, he connects fully with God. He loses his human consciousness and becomes one with the divine consciousness. And he turns all white and he's glowing. And it frightens the apostles that are with him. Now, most Christians think that that state is just reserved for Jesus. Jesus is the only person ever that can experience this oneness with God. And that's why he said, I and the Father are one. But remember what Jesus said to us. He said, you are the light. And he said, everything that I have done, you can do. Jesus was giving us the instructions for how to achieve this state for ourselves. Jesus tells us how to do this. Jesus was not the sole exception. He was the great example. He said, everything I've done you can do, so let me give you the instructions. And he did. He said, when you pray, go into your inner room and pray to your Father in secret, and there you will be rewarded. He said, if thine eye be single, thy entire body will be full of light. Those are Jesus' instructions. So what does that mean? It means that when you pray, when you make this connection with the divine, you have to go to the inner room, the secret place. And you have to shut the door, which means close your eyes. Stop seeing the way the world sees. He said, let thy eye be single. The single eye, the divine eye, the third eye, focus on that. Focus on the way God sees, not the human eyes, the divine eye. And when you focus on that, your body will be full of light. And that is where God will speak to you. Those are the instructions that he gave, but most of us want to be like Peter. Peter in the gospel says, hey, that was so cool. Let's build a temple up here to worship you, Jesus. And does Jesus say that was a good idea? No, Jesus says, we have to go back down the mountain, and I don't want you to tell anybody what happened up here. Jesus didn't want a temple worshiping him. He wanted us to be the temple. And what happened with Christianity is we built temples to honor Jesus, this great man who experienced oneness with God, and Jesus wanted us to be the temple. He was giving us the instructions so that we could be one with God. And yet none of us believe that we can experience that. That was only for Jesus. And Jesus was saying, everything I've done you can do. And then he adds this line, these things and greater. Jesus is saying you could do even greater than he did. But most of us don't believe that. We'd rather build the temple than be the temple. Many Christians have a knowledge of Jesus. They have a knowledge of God, but it's all intellectual. They can quote the Bible backwards and forwards. Give them a Bible quote and they know exactly where to find it. And they can tell you what the greatest theologians had to say about Jesus. They know Jesus here. Jesus was saying, it's here. I don't want you to have an intellectual knowledge of God. I want you to have an experiential knowledge of God. I want you to know God. I told you before, knowledge in the Bible is not intellectual knowledge. It means intimacy. It means oneness with God, knowledge of the heart. That's what Jesus was trying to get us to do. And 2,000 years later, Christians, we still don't get it. We want to go to Bible study. We want to hear about theologians, what they had to say about Jesus. And it's not about that. It's about the experience. Knowing God intimately. That's what Jesus was trying to get us to do. Which brings me back to Steve Jobs. One of the last things that he said in an interview before he died was this: your time here is limited, so don't waste it living someone else's life. Don't be trapped by dogma, which is living with the results of other people's thinking. Don't let the noise
of others. Drown out your own inner voice. And most important, have the courage to follow your heart and your intuition. They somehow know what you are to become. Everything else is secondary. Follow the inner voice. Don't be trapped by dogma. Dogma is what other people think, what the great theologians had to say about God. That's what they thought. We have to know what you think, your inner voice. Be still and know that. That's what Jesus was pointing to. And to me, that's the difference between religion and spirituality. Religion is the dogma, the head, the Bible study, the theology. That's building the temple. Spirituality is about the heart, the intimacy, the experience. It's about being the temple. Now, one of the other things I learned about Steve Jobs was his very last words. The words that he said on his deathbed. His last words were, "Oh, wow. Oh, wow. Oh, wow." That's the state of samadhi. That's enlightenment. That's the transfiguration. That's the awe. The awe. We don't have to wait till we're on our deathbeds to experience this. Jesus was giving us the instructions for how to experience that awe now, to experience the kingdom of heaven now. That's what he said. So I know that there are people in this room who have experienced that awe in your state of prayer or meditation, or just being out around nature. You know, Ralph Waldo Emerson, in his essay, Nature, said that when he was in the woods, that all mean egotism vanished, which means his human consciousness was gone. He said, "I become a transparent eyeball, single eye." And he said, "And there I become a part and parcel of God. I and the Father are one." He experienced that in nature. And I know many of you have had those awe moments. We want to have more of those awe moments in our lives and connecting with God and experiencing the light. And prayer and meditation are the way to do that. Now, in this week's epistle, I had a picture of the Christian mystic Thomas Merton. And Thomas Merton had this to say about what prayer and meditation is. He said, "Meditation is not the intellectual effort to master certain ideas about God. Meditation or prayer of the heart is the active effort we make to keep our hearts open so that we may be enlightened by God and filled with the realization of our true relationship to God. Hence, the aim of meditation in the context of the Christian faith is not to arrive at a scientific knowledge of God, but to know that God's own nature has been given to us by God as our true nature. It's knowing that you and the Father are one. It wasn't just for Jesus. It's for you. That's what Jesus was trying to teach us with those instructions. So we, of course, are approaching the season of Lent. And Marcus Borg, in our words of integration this morning, said it's a time to be still and to listen. Transfiguration means transforming. And I've shared with you before, one of my favorite quotes from Scripture is from Romans 12, which says, "Be ye transformed by the renewal of your mind." That's how you transform, renewing your mind. You have to take those thoughts in your mind and transform them. How can we hear the voice of God if there's so much noise in our head? We have to take those thoughts of worry, fear, anxiety, those thoughts in our heads that are blocking us from hearing that daughter of sound, which we heard about in our words of integration. That sound, the Hindus said, is the Om sound, spelled A-U-M. And we, of course, know that that is the I am, A-I-M. Be still and know that sound. We in the UCC say, God is still speaking, God is. But we've got to get still to listen. So this Lenten season, I know a lot of you give up stuff for Lent. Like you say, I'm going to give up chocolate or I'm going to give up soda. I have a better idea for you. Give up your negative thinking. Spend the 40 days giving up your anxiety, your worries, your fears, your resentments. Give those things up. Get rid of those things so that when Easter comes, you can then have that resurrection, that new life. Experience that life, but you've got to die first to all those other things. You've got to get rid of those so that you can experience the light. I'd like to end with words from Paramahansa Yogananda. He said, "No one can know Christ by reading books on theology. One must feel the presence of Christ in the cradle of silence. Here, the darkness will be burned up, and you will see the light behind the physical, the life behind all life." Namaste.